welcome to Art After Disaster. I'm so glad everyone could join us this evening. This is a really exciting opportunity to talk about emergency preparedness and recovery. And before we get started, I wanted to thank some very special sponsors who helped put the event together and made it possible. First would be Matt Cohn, who's board chair of Open Studios, Charlotte Lasasso, executive director of Boulder County Arts Alliance, Patricia Cohan and the Boulder Arts and Crafts Gallery, Cindy Sapucha, executive director of Open Studios, and also the City of Boulder, Office of Arts and Culture. My name is Jennifer Simon. I'm director of programs at CERF+. We're a nonprofit national arts organization that helps artists prepare for and recover from disasters and emergencies. And you'll hear more about CERF+ throughout the evening. And some questions that we might be thinking about are, why do I really need to care about career readiness and resilience? Why is this topic relevant to me? Why do I need to pay attention to it? Can you really plan for a disaster or emergency? Or is this something that is just going to happen? And if it does, it does. You know, you can't really do much about it. And what resources, information, and support exist to help me prepare and recover from emergencies and disasters? So these are questions to be thinking about as we talk about how relevant this issue is. And disasters are the new normal. There are an incredible amount of weather issues, climate change that are resulting in abnormal weather patterns, and many folks have experienced them. In 2016, as of September, there have been 12 weather and climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion each. That's per each disaster across the United States. And these events included 4 flooding events and 8 severe storm events, and overall resulted in 68 deaths. So Hurricane Matthew, the Louisiana floods, West Virginia, and of course, what's happening here in Colorado. Just to give you an idea, CERF+ provides emergency assistant grants to artists working in craft disciplines. And we did a survey in 2016 of our beneficiaries, and you can see the sorts of emergencies and disasters that they deal with. So in addition to illness and injury, which is 30%, there are a fair amount of disasters that are natural. Studio fires, home fires, floods, theft, and other crime. And if you notice the disasters in terms of a fire, that could be where the studio is a separate structure or when the studio is part of the home. So there's a particular vulnerability when it comes to artists because they do have that, their inventory, their supplies, their artwork, and their livelihood at stake when an emergency happens. The folks up here on this panel are going to speak to some of the issues that Colorado and the Boulder area have dealt with, and these are just some of the events that have happened. They're certainly not all inclusive, but a highlight of them, the 2013 flood. Priscilla Cohan is going to speak about that later on, the Black Forest Fire, the Four Mile Canyon Fire. Not only do these destroy and damage homes, but it costs billions of dollars to rebuild and to pay out in insurance claims, and it takes artists years to recover and rebuild, as we'll hear from our panelists in just a moment. So Priscilla Cohan, I had the pleasure of spending the afternoon with Priscilla and her amazing work, incredibly generous artist who has been helped a lot by the community, and we'll be hearing from her in a moment, but I just wanted to show you a bit of her work. She does pottery, she does community arts, she's active in the Boulder Arts and Crafts Gallery. Here's painting and her community work. And then when we hear from Priscilla, this is the flood in 2013 she experienced, and I just visited her home, which is really progressing along wonderfully, and a photo of her studio. Here's a kiln that she was able to purchase with a grant, which she'll talk about. And then we have joining us Michael Beats, who's an artist, furniture maker, sculptor, video, and he has experienced a studio fire as well. And here are photos of some of his work. Life-size, public, kind of my commentary, but kind of disrupting the normal engagement, I guess, people would have. How people come together and congregate. And here's some brief footage of his actual studio fire that he took to try to get documentation of it for insurance purposes and also to see what had happened.
It's a depressing video.
Is that sound water running?
No, those are some sound effects with the.
Oh, okay, some sizzling.
They're more pleasant than the actual sound.
So certainly, you know, a lot of devastation and look all the cleanup that has to happen to recover from that. Also joining us, we're lucky to have from the Small Business Development Center in Boulder, Mary Ann Ballantyne, and from the Boulder County Land Use Department, Jen Severinsen. So I'm just kind of going to go over and get started with our panelists on some questions. And Priscilla, if you could kind of talk us through your story, the 2013 flood, what happened and what was the impact of the disaster?
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for coming from Vermont for this event. And I am pleased to be here. So what happened in the September of 2013, there was a catastrophic flood in the whole Front Range area, stretching almost all the way from South Fort Collins to north of Denver. And the highest recorded rain was about 18 inches in a couple of days, just to the west of Lyons. And Lyons is between two rivers, the North and South St. Vrain River. And my neighborhood in particular is at the confluence. So it's where the two rivers come together. And so my whole neighborhood was a class 3 rapid. And it varying degrees of destruction. My home wasn't the most badly destroyed. There were just a block away, houses drifted away and were severely damaged. And in my case, I have a studio and a home, and my studio is a newer structure with a cement slab, and it had almost 3 feet of water and silt in it. And the house only had 14 inches, but because of the age of the house and the poor construction, it required several years and many dollars worth of reconstruction. And I elevated it out of the floodplain, put a foundation underneath it. There was not one before. And changed out the windows and did some new things to the house. It's 3 years plus a handful of days since then, and I am just firing my first kiln load of pots. And my studio, while it was repaired early in the process, became staging area for the building process. So,
Michael, can you share what happened to your studio?
Sure. Well, actually, I've lived in Boulder for about 1 year now, and when I came here, I didn't have time to move my studio with me. I was working on a big project, so I moved here with the intention of going back and getting all of my things. So I had all of my work, all of my belongings in my studio in Wisconsin, where I had lived before. And the plan was to go get it in December, and I actually got the call in November that the studio was burned down, the warehouse it was in was burned down because there was an arson fire. So I didn't have to do any cleanup or anything like that because there was nothing really to clean up. But I did go back and try to salvage some scraps of remains of some of my work. But, yeah, it was a brutal experience and something I think is going to take years to kind of recover, or if it is possible to recover. I think it'll be years before I feel like I have some work. But yeah, that's the story.
What are some of the steps, either logistical or emotional, that you go through to kind of process this kind of event?
For me, I've just tried to stay really busy, stay distracted. I had 2 commissions at the time of the fire, big, like large-scale commissions. And they were sympathetic to my situation, but that only goes for so long. Either you're going to do it or you're not going to do it. And I couldn't afford not to do it. So I had to force myself to kind of get it together. And in a way that was very functional for me. Because I never spent too much time thinking about it. I mean, doing this panel talk was kind of making me rethink the whole thing again, which is really healthy. I have a lot of questions I need to kind of go over myself, but it has put me in touch with my work in a different way than it was before. And I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier. Often we're at odds with our work, or we're struggling with the work, and we shove it in a corner, or we have all different kinds of relationships with the work. And I think the fire made me realize how close I was to all of the pieces, even though some of them I had not worked on for months, and so I have this kind of new understanding of the relationship anyway, which is part of one of the good things that can come out.
How about you, Priscilla? What were some of the steps you had to go through to kind of begin to process what happened?
I guess earlier in the process, I experienced this real swell of adrenaline, and I don't know. I came back into town. I was actually out of town during the actual flood event, and when I got back to town, I was just like, okay, what do I do? And I was wanting to help some friends of mine whose property was down the street from my own and inaccessible because of still high river flow. And I just thought, oh, I need to help this person, get their stuff and get into their house. And I had another friend who had taken me in after the flood and said to me, you have to get your studio fixed. And I wasn't even thinking about it. I had, 2 feet of mud and silting water in my studio, and it was just the furthest thing from my mind. And so the next day she organized a crew, and we had to sort of sneak into Lyons and get it, mucked out. And people I had never even met showed up with shovels and rain gear, and I bought 3 pair of muck boots, and we went to town. So I guess I would put that in the category of denial. There was a lot of that going on, and then that sort of surge of adrenaline where I wanted to be a community organizer. Ran for city office, and I wrote all these extra grants for projects I didn't know how to do, and which I'm learning. But so it was sort of, I guess that was sort of my initial response. And then once the hard work started, I was pretty much surrounded by helpful people who helped me.
How prepared were you for what had happened in terms of documentation, inventory, or insurance? Had you thought this could ever happen to you? Had you taken some precautions, or are there things that you wish you would have done that could have made a difference?
So since I bought my house just about 20 years ago, I've been paying flood insurance. And I didn't never in my wildest dreams imagine what it was even for, I mean, I know what a flood is, but I didn't imagine that there would come one someday. And so I was grateful for that. And I think that in terms of organization and documentation, I have little to none, and I, have things on various hard drives and CDs and random spots that weren't affected by the flood. And I guess I would have liked to have better storage of my artwork collection that I had, which was just in a portfolio of my earlier work, like, high school stuff that's now gone, and college figure drawing classes, which I had fondness for those pieces. And, but I think in preparation, the thing that I would say is that I'm a pretty resilient person. So, and as business-wise, I was not prepared, and but just I feel that ultimately I was able to stick in with for the long run.
How about you, Michael? Were there steps that you took or you feel you could have taken to be more prepared, even though this was sort of a temporary situation?
Yeah, it's funny because my studio had actually flooded, maybe 6 months before then, and not too much of my work got damaged, but I got everything off the floor, and I made sure everything was covered and in large plastic bins and all of that. But it just didn't occur to me that the whole place could burn down. So I don't think there's anything I could have done. Some things where I got lucky, where a lot of things that were in large plastic bins actually survived because the bins melted over the things and protected them from the water when they put the fire out. I had a lot of work stored like in foam and then in cardboard, and all of that work was destroyed because first it was ceramics, but it burned and then they doused it with water, so it just wasn't a good situation. But now I try to keep more of my work not in one place. I think that's a good strategy. If something happens, then at least you have some other work out there. At the time, I had a show with 2 large pieces in the UK, so those 2 pieces survived. And, actually, I was happy. I have 2 things. I can't say I could prepare for it. I think sometimes there's nothing you can do, but I do think about it. Earlier today, I was thinking about somebody in a studio in the same building that's working with wax, and they have all these burners. And I was thinking, well, that's another issue. It's like thinking outside of your own studio. What are people doing around you that might destroy your work?
That's a good point, especially if you're in a building with other artists in it. I want to get to Marianne and Jen in a second, but what resources, I know you mentioned community support, Priscilla, in terms of either the county offered or, grants, support, what resources were available to help you rebuild and identify places of support?
Well, everyone asked us about FEMA, and so they were there like within hours. Even before I got back to Lions, I had my FEMA number, which I can't remember, and they sent a check for relocation services so that I could find a place to stay. And immediately met with my insurance adjuster, and they were pretty helpful throughout the event. Then the Boulder County Arts Alliance offered a post-disaster or a grant for people who had suffered in some way. So I was able to get a little bit of money from them. My place of business where I work at the Boulder Arts and Crafts Gallery put together a benefit, and there were 3 of us who benefited from that. It was people brought in old art that they were ready to part with, and they raised about $10,000. Their local grants, there was Oscar Blues had a foundation in place called Canned Aid, and they're still doing generous things. They sent canned water to Flint. So they offered small grants to everybody in Lyons, and then the Lyons Community Foundation had established itself as a resource about 3 years before the flood. So they were on the ground running and were an excellent source or resource for people who wanted to really put their money right into the action. And that was really a valuable asset. One of my friends says that everyone should just start a foundation in their town just so that they're prepared for an event like this, because it really was the perfect thing. So there was a lot of support, and then as days and years rolled by, Boulder County, I was saying earlier that right after the flood, there was, they said this organization is going to come in and they're going to set up everybody with a caseworker. So everybody had these interviews, like you had to go to the basement of the church and do the interview, and then nothing happened for like a year. And then after a year, we had caseworkers who were then able to start helping to distribute the sum of the thousands of dollars that was coming into the state through CDBG-DR grants. And so it was really complicated and long and complicated. And it was not a short game. So.
How about you, Michael? Were there any organizations or resources that were able to provide assistance?
Well, actually, I was kind of in denial about the whole thing. I didn't think about reaching out for any help. But CERF Plus actually reached out to me, and I was still kind of like, really? But yeah, that was a huge help for me, and I struggled to even kind of fill out the applications. It was just a really difficult moment to think about. So that was amazing. And also, another artist friend of mine put together a GoFundMe to raise money, and that's also a really good idea, is to do something like that. If there's especially friends that are more well-known artists that have larger followings. That was really helpful as well, and kind of amazing to see everybody help me out, because it's a little different when there's a huge catastrophe or when you just have a solo catastrophe, like nobody really knows about it. So it's kind of important to reach out a little bit. And I wasn't ready to do that. I think I was just grieving. And so it kind of that happened because of friends and people like you guys that actually care and reach out. And I think that's something important, because when these things do happen, some of us are good about asking for help and some of us are not.
Marianne, can you talk a little bit about what your role is in emergency assistance for not only artists but businesses in general?
Sure. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay. So first of all, I want to just mention what the SBDC is. It's an acronym for the Small Business Development Center. We're a national organization under the umbrella of the SBA. We're not not completely governmental agency, but we are funded by nonprofits. We are funded by corporations, and for the city, by the city of Boulder and the chamber and so on. So what we do pre and post disaster is we are the boots on the ground to help businesses of all sizes. And one of the things that is common with businesses of all sizes is that people begin businesses, and particularly artists are just the same as regular people, or all people who start their businesses. We start our businesses because we have a passion or a love or a special talent. And so we start the business, but we really don't understand the business side of the business. And so that is what the SBDC does. We help people through free consulting, through inexpensive workshops, and we really support businesses in their growth, in their becoming more resilient, becoming more using best practices in their business. So that being said, after the flood, we helped with the SBA helping businesses fill out SBA loan documents. And we were tasked by the state, by the Office of Economic Development, to help with a federal grant called the CDBGR. It's an acronym for a number of grants. They're federal grants that came down through HUD to help disaster victims or businesses and other community organizations. I am a disaster consultant, so my job has been, for the last 2.5 years, has been to work directly with businesses, with business owners or managers, to fill out the numerous federal forms that one needs to get federal assistance. And these grants are help businesses get up to a $50,000 loan or grant, a grant that doesn't have to be paid back. So it's very, very helpful, and it's very, very it's a long time process. So I always tell people that the first place to go is to your community, because they're going to have more resources. But I have learned a tremendous amount by sitting in meetings with businesses to know what they are missing, what they were missing, and what they need to get in order to be prepared and be more resilient for any kind of disaster. That's been a huge learning process for me as a consultant.
And Jennifer, what is the Boulder County Land Use Department's role in emergency readiness and recovery?
So I'm a flood engineer, Boulder County Land Use, and our role in this flood, I actually am not from Boulder, I came here from Louisiana after the flood, and so when I got here in January, everybody had mobilized, we were working with FEMA. I think the county worked really closely with communities, trying to identify, resilience measures and ways to recover and assessments. Land use department does what we call a hazard mitigation review, and we've done a number of these on people that need repairs, replacements, and that was after the disaster. But as far as before the disaster, I think there's some ways that you can sort of minimize the impact of either a disaster, or even if it's just something that happens just to you, an individual fire or theft. I think some of these things can kind of apply across the board. And we recommend, as far as for flood, see if you're in the floodplain. And if you are, talk to your insurance, make sure you have enough insurance. And on your structure, if you insure your work, but things like that. If you're looking to build a new structure before something happens, the county can help with that. We can do a site plan review for you, and as part of that, assess where some of the hazards are on your property. Maybe help you determine where the safest place is to site something. We can do that on site, do a pre-application conference on site, which costs a little bit of money, or you can come in and meet with one of our planners, and they can talk over what you want to do, what you want to build with you. And then also, I think it's really important as far as for structures, from a land use point of view, you want to make sure that your structure is legal. And so that means, was it permitted, or is it being used for the purpose that it was permitted for? It's permitted. was built a long time before permits. There's something we call legal non-conforming, which means, are you okay to have it there? You just want to check all of this and make sure everything's kind of squared away for existing structures, and that you do get it properly cited and permitted. And then I think also, after a disaster or something happens as part of the recovery phase, it can be a really long process, and we know that, and it's so frustrating because you need your lives to get back to normal as soon as possible. I'm from New Orleans. I lived there when the tree happened. I understand. But, just federal funding and just kind of any government that comes together and tries to address a disaster, it kind of takes some time. It's not something that we do every day. So it does take some time. Just, one step at a time. I think a really important thing, contact your insurance company. Contact your local planning or building if it's not Boulder County or City of Boulder. Find out what your options are, your local jurisdiction to see if there's any kind of funding that is available. We said the CDBG that kind of came with it afterwards, but that was funding that was different than your everyday type of funds. Also, I would say documents everything just for yourself, for your own. When a disaster happens, you don't want to have to look for all your documents or anything saying this is mine or this is what I had. So, and also just any kind of correspondence you have, I would say document that as well, just so you don't forget what's been said. And if one person helps you at the beginning and then it shifts over to another agency, somebody else, you have that record. So I think documentation is really critical. I think that can help whether it's a disaster or it's something individual that happens to you.
Having worked in Louisiana and Katrina, are there differences and similarities here in Boulder, or is it too soon to be able to tell?
So I actually didn't work in Louisiana as a planner. I lived in Louisiana for New Orleans. That was a completely different animal as far as scale and they're still recovering. But the same sort of thing. Immediately, FEMA reached out and tried to sort of trying to figure out where everybody was. But still, documentation was important, and I think once they kind of figured out with the planning process, trying to work towards identifying areas that are maybe not the best places to rebuild, or trying to figure out the safest places where, if you wanted to put your house back, we've raised a lot of houses down there. Obviously, way above ground level there is the base flood elevation. So, and I see some people doing that here as well. And so, I think as far as from the planning perspective, it's probably a lot of the same sorts of things that anybody gets.
What are, from everyone's perspective, what are some of the challenges that happen after one experiences a disaster? We talked about, you got to be in it for the long haul. It's a process that takes some time to build back and to recover. You mentioned business practices, documents business owners should have. What are some key things that you kind of see over and over again, or that in your experience were just the biggest challenges?
I would say a huge challenge is if you don't think about things ahead of time. That's a big challenge. And the Red Cross always tells us to be prepared. The fire department tells us to be prepared, and we totally ignore all of those things. But if you are a business, well, let's say you're an artist and you have a home studio, but you're not set up as a business. You're just set up as a person doing art or a sole proprietor. It's very easy to become a business, to become registered with the Secretary of State. It's inexpensive, and then you're designated as a business. So you have some protection and some designation that will help you help you see yourself more as a for-profit business and as an entrepreneur, because that's what you are when you own your own business. Then if you do take the time to get your documents in order, keep your taxes in order, keep track of receipts and records, those are the same kinds of things that accountants and bookkeepers will always tell you. It's a good practice to do for yourself, and it's essential to do for a business. Having all of your documents backed up in the cloud somewhere. And that's one of the things that we saw over and over again that I've seen with my clients is that businesses didn't have those, and a lot of people actually keep their accounting books by hand. So having an accounting software program like QuickBooks or things like that can be backed up. When you have those documents in order and they're safe, and you have an appraisal or you know what the value of your art is, you are so much more secure, and there's so many things to worry about after a disaster that if you can take that off your shoulders and you can know that financially you're in good shape financially, especially with your insurances and business liability, homeowners insurance, and so on. So I think that you can do those things ahead of time. Those are the things that we at the SBDC help with. CERF Plus obviously helps with. And those are the takeaways that I would really encourage all small businesses to think about ahead of time. And that's what we usually learn after a disaster. But let's think more forward, have more forward thinking to become more resilient and learn from the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're seeing is, with technology and entrepreneurship, artists are really self-employed workers. They're small businesses, and there's a certain amount of administrative responsibility and activities that they have to do that is not everyone's favorite job. When you're an artist, you want to be in the studio creating. But it really is also about allocating a certain amount of time, either it's per week or, maybe you have an intern or assistant do it, but making sure on a regular basis that those things are in order, because it can have such a huge impact if they're not.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly that one of the artist clients that we have who was able to get probably about $30,000 or $40,000. He was able to get his documentation and all of his paperwork together in about 3 weeks. He had all of his taxes together. Everything was organized, and he'd had a business for a long time, for decades. So he knew those practices, and he also had a part-time person who worked in his office. And it was amazing to see how quickly he could get all this together. One person business, and he had taken the time to do those things that you were just talking about. That's a really good success story. He had a good outcome, and he's moving forward. He's thriving in his business. His business just picked right back up, and partly because he was so well organized. And the $30,000 or $40,000 grant that he got really helped as well.
Michael, what are some steps that you're taking now or that you find yourself having to take?
Sure. Well, I'll just say I didn't have insurance when my fire happened, so there was no chance of me reclaiming any kind of value for any of my work. That was a hard lesson to learn. So obviously now I have some insurance, and I think some of the challenges though for me were more emotional because I just lost my whole life's work. So then, how do I continue that body of work I've been building on for years? So that's kind of the thing I'm interested in. Since there was really no hope to kind of get any kind of financial assistance from the work itself. So I'm trying to work through that issue. How do I start making new work, or do I continue the work I was making, and how does the fire play a role in that? I don't have answers to any of those things, but I think that's, for me, in terms of challenges and working through challenges, that's what I'm doing now. And I'm just slowly building up a new body of work, and also kind of grieving my old body of work at the same time.
As an artist, they either tend to be like really egotistical or really self-deprecating, and I can imagine being like, is the universe trying to tell me something? Maybe I shouldn't be doing this. But it's almost like, being an artist, you're already vulnerable, you're already at risk. When I tell people what I do, I'm a program director for an organization that helps artists in emergencies. Folks' immediate response is, artists have emergencies? And I say, yeah, they're not only just like you, but they're also different in that, they have this entire self-made body of work that, of course it can be for consumers and you can get commissions, but to a large extent, artists are intrinsically motivated, like they want to create something that they feel is missing or needed in the world. And I'm just wondering, Priscilla, how are you dealing emotionally with, accepting what happened and moving on? Take 2 mics, because it's important.
There's been a couple of waves of emotional responses to the flood, and one very particular one was like after the flood happened and my house needed to be deconstructed and my studio needed to be deconstructed and I needed to get a bunch of things in line. I really knew what to do next. There was a lot of activity. Then there was about a 6 month to a year period where I did all those things, and then I was waiting for permits, and that was really, really frustrating, and I just didn't know what to do. And then hanging on to that, I feel like I've been so supported throughout this whole process. I almost would say that I don't recognize it as a trauma. I like building, and there's a few things that I lost, like those high school drawings. I can reread those. And artwork by other people. But mostly it's been a positive experience. There's definitely been some breakdowns and some really frustrating moments, mostly happening in municipal offices, and but with support too, friends marching me in there and saying, "Let's get this done." So I guess now is another wave or another crest of what happens next. I'm just on the cusp of starting to rebuild my pottery business, and just started making work again. And I have my job, and I have a lot more net than I did before the flood. So it's sort of, what do I do now? And how do I make better decisions and approach my artwork more professionally, and all those questions, which I'm sort of sitting back and letting some of the answers come to some degree.
There's sort of an interesting conversation in the field about, why are artists' needs in terms of emergency preparedness and recovery different from anyone else's? Everyone needs insurance, everyone needs money. Are artists' needs different? Are they similar? I was interested to hear people's thoughts about, should artists be seen as a special population that have unique needs, or is it really, you know, when a disaster happens, everyone's in the same boat?
I'll talk. I think you mentioned this earlier a little bit about our work kind of existing for ourselves, which is a little bit different than a product. Sometimes we make products, we do commissions, but the majority of our work is kind of for ourselves, and at some point it becomes shared or public or whatever. But that's a sort of different kind of space that we inhabit. It's not a home, it's not a factory. It's, you know, the studio is a really unique, special kind of space. And that's hard to talk about in terms of funding and those types of issues. Yeah, a lot of it for me is that there are these particular types of spaces we need that don't readily exist. And the ones that do exist are, especially in Colorado, kind of hard to come by. So yeah, we often go without things like insurance or, you know, any number of things just to have that space that allows us to make the work. And I think that's a much larger issue than just this conversation, but I think that's a large part of it. It's difficult to define those spaces and why they're so important.
I just wanted to say I'm married to a family of various types of artists, and well, I only have one husband now. My husband's an illustrator, professional illustrator, and singer-songwriter. And what I see in the artists, from Todd's father, who was a sculptor, to painting, to Todd's brother, who is a fabricator in New York City, to Todd's studio, is that an artist space, I think, is a very sacred space. It's very, because of the level of creativity and that your art is coming from your heart and soul. It's very different from an accounting office where your documents, you can pick up, you know, you can go by a desk and you can put your papers in there. You can feel very strongly about your business, but really, artists are those are sacred spaces. To me, that's what I think the difference is. So it's very difficult to replace that. It has to be a special place, just like you're grieving your studio and your creations. And I'm sure, I know I've worked with a lot of artists who feel that way. It's not just traumatic to lose and to go through a disaster, but you've also lost sort of a child of your own creation.
It's also really almost your identity. You know, you have to create a new identity of, you know, who am I with this artwork lost or having gone through this experience. But I also wanted to say, you know, when Boulder has its open studios, which is an excellent opportunity for the public to meet artists and to see and have access to these incredible sacred spaces. And I've never seen two artist spaces that are alike. And you really get the sense of, this is the world this artist lives in order to make the work that they do. And I just wanted to plug the open studios and just what an amazing opportunity that is to meet people who are in your neighborhood or in your community who are doing this every day. And sometimes you don't even know, oh, I didn't know there was a studio there. Yeah.
I'm going to speak to that for 1 second, because that is probably the one realization I've had through the fire. And I think it's something that's good for us to talk about, because we often just see the artwork as objects. And what happens, the difference between a product or an object and an artwork is this kind of embodiment. And I think that's what you're talking about. It's ourselves in the work, and it has a kind of life. So sometimes I could make a choice, like to go see a friend or to go see their art show. And I would usually go see their work, because for me, that's kind of them in another
It's
form.
far more revealing.
And more interesting. But I think that's a good point. You know, the artwork is really alive and it embodies us. And so when we lose it, it's really traumatic.
I'd like to speak to that a little bit too, the process or the space for making artwork. And I feel like I heard a teacher say recently that art is, especially abstract art, is helpful for knowing your mind, because you don't know what you're going to do next. And that's what I find to be the most gratifying in my own work, is when I'm out in unknown territory. And so having a space where you can go and explore those territories that you don't have to explain. You don't have to, so it's kind of comes from a different part of your mind or your capacity. With the business, you have to explain it all, and it has to be clear, and it's helpful for all of those reasons. But when you enter into a studio, you leave all that behind, and you can. Experiment is one way to look at it, but more just sort of having an experience of not knowing what's going to happen.
I think somebody said along the way, art asks a question, or good art asks a question. There's that uncertainty that it wants to provoke in you. Does anybody have any questions or comments for the panel or anything we've talked about? Yes.
I have a couple of stories, but I also have a very basic question. And that is, in working with the artists, did you find that all insurance companies were equal, or were there some that worked better with you?
Well, for CERF Plus, we definitely find insurance companies that are artist friendly. There's a company called Zinc Creative that bills itself as we're here for artists. We understand their unique needs, because you don't want to have to educate your insurance agent about art and the language behind it and why it's a value. You want somebody to already get that. So I would say, all of the resources on the CERF Plus website for insurance companies have been vetted, and there's a lot of, there's local volunteer lawyers for the arts organizations and others, and you can certainly reach out to us. Because we're national, we kind of know networks where we do know insurance companies that are sensitive to this, and we often go to them for advice and expertise. So I think it's really critical to find an insurance agent who understands what you do and isn't trying to oversell you things that you may not need, because it is an investment, and ultimately you want the insurance to provide something to you, not be something where, oh, well, you didn't have this one thing and we got you, but the best choice that you can have.
I didn't hear the name of the company.
It's called Zinc, Z-I-N-C Creative, and they specialize in art. I'll let that go. Art that is on consignment, flood insurance, structures. We have a number of videos on our website virtually, and we also have this business insurance guide you can look at about what questions to ask. We hear from a lot of younger artists that if I'm going to choose between health insurance and business insurance, I'm going to choose health insurance. But to know the risks you might be taking, and to know what eventually you need to invest in to have a successful business, I think, it just can't be something that is ignored anymore. And, the more you educate yourself, the more you can ask those questions. And we're going to talk about some resources that are available in a minute, but I just wanted to talk about the American Red Cross are great friends of CERF Plus, and they do amazing work. They did a presentation for artists in Vermont, and they shared with us this overall stakeholder recovery process about sort of who gets on board when. And, obviously the first people to respond, federal government, state governments. But when things start to be available to artists, it's usually more when it comes down to the community level. when organizations like Boulder County Arts Alliance recognize that there's a need for artists to have funding because they're not getting it from other federally sourced places. So I think those are really important, and everyone who cares about the arts can lend their voice to making sure that the arts have a place at the table in terms of disasters. And also just the recovery process is multidimensional. The American Red Cross has a recovery framework, and part of it now includes cultural resiliency. What are the treasures that may be lost, arts, culture, tradition, that are really part of building a community back to where it was. And so, things like social justice, something artists tend to be particularly aware of. They kind of see, the inequality in things, and tend to acknowledge that as well. And also we kind of talked about, how it impacts your identity. What does it mean to be an artist if you no longer have your studio and your work? This is another artist that we just funded, Ben Medansky. He's a ceramicist in Los Angeles, and he had just so happened to have photographed his work during a party, and the day before, he had his studio caught on fire. And so, luckily, he happened to have all the documentation, and he did this series of before and after. And he also did a video live stream of his of the impact of the damage, and it got a lot of hits on social media. And when you do have a disaster that just hits you on an individual level, social media can really be useful in getting people to be aware of what's going on. There was somebody who bought one of his pieces a couple years ago, and that person started a crowdfunding campaign for Ben that Ben didn't even know about, $25,000 already. So just having that network, in fact, actually, Ben said something really interesting, which is, we no longer live in a world where you can be isolated in your studio. Your work needs to live in the world if you want to have a sustainable and resilient career. And I know that challenges, our conventions about, the suffering artist alone in the studio. So a little bit about CERF Plus. Our organization has been around for 30 years, and we started at craft shows when craft artists would sell their work and pass the hat when they found out somebody might have had an illness, or they had a car accident on the way to the show, or a theft, or were going through a rough time, and they would make very small contributions and give it to an artist in need. And 30 years later, it has really grown into a nonprofit that supports artists up to grants of $6,000 and more. And the resources we have available, there's some studio protectors here for people to grab, some business insurance guides, other valuable information from the Boulder County Office of Emergency Management, and the SBDC. Please feel free to grab those. Any artist can use our resources, but our emergency financial assistance grants are just for artists working in craft disciplines. And the criteria is available on our website, but the definition of craft is also changing. So we're recognizing that as well, but it's really to honor those artists that still work in mediums like wood, textiles, metalsmith, jewelry, ceramics, things that are materials-based. But every time we meet an artist that goes through a disaster that applies for our assistance, we learn, do we need to tweak our guidelines somehow? Every time an artist applies for assistance, we have a review committee of people, all over the country that have worked for the NEA, Americans for the Arts, who have expertise, fellow artists. So they'll help us determine, wow, we don't currently consider this, but maybe we should. Because, artists are redefining what art is. And so there's a lot of craftivism going on, social justice in art, performances that incorporate craft. So that's becomes something we're looking at. We also have no interest loans that craft artists can qualify for, and those are up to $9,000. And you can pay $30 a month, however long. So, Michael can receive our financial assistance and also qualify for a no interest loan. Our website is a really important resource, and again, our audience is mainly artists and arts organizations. Whenever there's an emergency or a disaster, it's the first thing you'll see on our website, with links to go to, trusted sites like the American Red Cross and FEMA to get the latest information about what might be coming your way to prepare for. We also have a lot of artist stories. So in their own words, whether it's through narratives or video, artists of all disciplines, young and old, rural, living in urban cities, some that make their living through other means, other artists who are able to support themselves through the sale of their work, that not only talk about what has happened to them, but what steps they've taken. So you can hear from another ceramicist how he helped rebuild his studio. Jeremy Ayers is in Vermont, and he had his grandfather's barn burned to the ground. And so you can hear stories from a number of artists. So the Studio Protector also has these great sections: get ready, get help, help yourself. And all of these are resources and links and information to give you information and action steps to take to help build a resilient career. One of the things when we talk about career protection to get artists interested in it is to ask them, what can they least afford to lose? So maybe that's your inventory, your artwork, your equipment, your client base, your livelihood. But if there's if we're having trouble getting through to artists, why don't they think this applies to them? We kind of try to get them to think of what can they least afford to lose, because if you lose that, what could happen? We also did a survey of artists in craft disciplines in terms of insurance. It was called Ensuring Creativity, and this is on our website. And 62% had no property or liability insurance. So this is very common. A lot of artists don't know they should have insurance. They think the homeowners covers it, and unfortunately, it's not until after something happens that they realize it hasn't been covered. They also don't have a lot of cash reserves. So 75% have less than 3 months cash reserves, and 47% have less than 1 month. So, these are artists that don't have 401ks or maybe don't have dual incomes. And so they're even more vulnerable because they might not have the funds for a rainy day or the savings to be able to help rebuild as quickly as they want to. So when we talk about readiness, we're really talking about protecting your workspace, your artwork, and your career. And those are really 3 important things to any artist. How to respond to emergency in your studio. Do you have a smoke alarm? Are things properly wired? And I really liked what Michael said. What are your studio mates doing? Who else is doing work that you need to be aware of? Because we are dealing with an artist now who had a studio, somebody had a studio next door and was careless, and it affected his work. And so now he's applied for assistance. So finding critical information, helping others in an emergency, and using your skills as an artist to be of use in your community. Maybe you're a furniture maker and you can use your carpentry skills, or you're a muralist and you can help bring awareness to a community or use healing. Priscilla showed me that she's been having neighbors make some ceramics in her studio. It helps the artist, and it also helps the community through the creative act. Also, some more great resources online. The Boulder Office of Emergency Management is a great resource for current status of disasters, resources available. The Boulder, Colorado flood website, that's really a rich resource, and it really deconstructs a fairly complicated topic. And also, as we wrap up today, I just wanted you to think about whether you're an artist or you know an artist. What are 3 things that you can do to protect your career and be better prepared? Maybe you encounter somebody and you can tell them, hey, I went to this workshop and they talked about documenting your work. I was just wondering if that's something that you do. Or, maybe you could actually buy work from an artist that helps support what they're doing, as opposed to going to a Target or IKEA. People often say, and I don't have to tell you guys this, but oh, this mug costs $40. Any artist can tell you why that mug costs $40, because not only does the artist need to make somewhat of a profit, but it's their time, it's their materials, it's their rent, it's the money they spend on insurance. So all those things are really to support the livelihood of an artist. So I think it's important to support artists at any chance we can. In fact, I know the Boulder Art and Craft Gallery is open until 8 o'clock. Does anyone have any other questions? I know I'm sure our Jen has to go, but our panelists would be happy to talk with anyone. And I just wanted to thank all of the sponsors of the 2 workshops today, Matt Cohn and our 2 artists that shared their story. I know it's not easy, but we carry your story with you, and it just brings a greater sense of understanding and sensitivity as we go forward with our work. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.
Don't rush. Please take some chairs if you're interested.